All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on the 20th floor cafe of our Natural Resources Agency headquarters in Sacramento. And thanks to a whole lot of people who are joining us online through YouTube streaming. We are thrilled to have Josh Jackson here as our guest in the agency. And Josh, you may know a little bit about our agency, but we're a big, broad agency, 26,000 people, including firefighters and park rangers and game wardens and scientists and lawyers and water engineers, so geologists, so many different folks. But I think one thing that connects us across the agency is our love of California and our love of nature, which is why it's going to be so fun to spend the next hour with you. If you are joining us, you probably know that Josh has written a beautiful book that we're going to unpack here today. It's beautifully written. And it's beautifully illustrated with some remarkable photographs. So let's jump in. First of all, welcome. We just met 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We've even got some of the images from the book happening in the background.
It's just amazing. So let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Give us the origin story of this remarkable work.
Yeah, so it started in 2015. I was looking for a place to camp. That's how everything starts. If you're living in Los Angeles and you're looking for a place to camp. I had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time. We just had a third child, so she was a newborn. And you know, those last few months of pregnancy, you're kind of hunkering down, not leaving home very much. And so by the time we had our third child, I was pretty much ready to get out of the city. I live in Los Angeles, kind of in the heart of the city. And my 5-year-old and 2-year-old were also pretty antsy. And so we were like, let's go camping, let's get out there. And unfortunately, every state park and national park campground within 3 hours of LA was booked solid. So I reached out to a friend who always found campsites out of thin air. And he said, why don't you camp on some BLM land? It's no reservations and it's free. And I said, where is this magical place that you speak of, you know?
Yeah.
And he said, I think it's out in the desert somewhere. I was like, so do you actually know where this place is? That was the first time I had ever heard the term BLM land, or Bureau of Land Management lands. Even as an avid outdoor enthusiast, I had never heard of these land forms. And so I got
How the heck did the camping trip go with two?
So I got online on the BLM website. I found this place called the Trona Pinnacles, which is in the middle of the Mojave Desert, kind of southwest of Death Valley National Park. It promised open dispersed camping, and it had a pit toilet, which I thought was important for a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time. And yeah, we loaded up my Honda Element with my two older kids, and we bounced our way to the Trona Pinnacles, which is, I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but it's sort of this otherworldly.
Has anyone ever been there? All right.
Yeah.
People. Nice.
It's like this otherworldly, ethereal, kind of feels like you're on Mars. There's these giant tufa spires that kind of rise up like 250 feet. And my kids thought they looked like drip sandcastles you make at the beach.
Yeah.
Surrounded by these salt flats that are really bouncy. And I remember running with my kids, and my 5-year-old daughter was like, it feels like we're on a giant trampoline. So we had this really cool weekend experience, and that experience was sort of what led to this obsession of mine with BLM land. But because I had 3 kids at the time under the age of 6, most of our camping excursions till the pandemic were on state park, national parks, where campgrounds are a little more accessible. But during those 5 years, this obsession kind of began to grow and grow and grow. I went to the library, ordered every single book I could that had anything to do with public lands, anything to do with the BLM. Unfortunately, there's really no books dedicated solely to the BLM. You might find one chapter inside of kind of a public lands book. But I began pouring this foundation of understanding the history of the BLM and kind of what landscapes existed on BLM, but I still hadn't really gone to many places, and that kind of all changed in 2020.
Amazing. So let's break down that acronym, BLM, Bureau of Land Management. So much of California nature is famous: Yosemite, Joshua Tree, Big Sur. But you explain in the book that BLM lands were almost considered sort of these leftover lands with westward expansion.
Yeah.
Explain what these are.
Yeah, so part of the reason I started falling in love with these lands was because, even though I hadn't gone to them, is the more you go back into the history of BLM land, they were started in 1946, kind of a merging of the Grazing Service and the General Land Office. And as you said, the General Land Office was sort of encouraging westward expansion, basically giving huge tracts of land away for free.
Right.
And the grazing service, was kind of married into that, and they formed the BLM. In fact, for the first 30 years of the BLM, critics often call it the Bureau of Livestock and Mining. Because if you were out on BLM land, you're gonna find cows and you're gonna find a lot of mining. So essentially, historians refer to these lands as the leftover lands, the lands nobody wanted, because they weren't beautiful enough for the National Park Service, they were too lifeless for fish and wildlife, and they weren't forested enough for the Forest Service. Nor were they purchased by land barons, developers, railroads, and they were too unsuitable for homesteading, and so these were kind of the leftover acres. Astonishingly, 245 million acres of BLM land across the western 11 states and Alaska.
So just for a little bit of context, the entirety of California is just over 100 million acres. So that's 2.5 California
Yes.
BLM.
And just in California, we have 15 million acres of BLM land.
Wow.
And so I was falling in love with the sort of the scrappy underdog nature of BLM land. I mean, everyone loves a good underdog story. And I felt like, wow, there might be a story for me to tell here, but again, I hadn't really gone out there. But I was pouring that foundation of understanding and falling in love with kind of the very idea of how these lands came to be and were they left over for a reason. I had no idea what kind of beauty awaited me.
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, I'm so excited that we have an overflow crowd here. So for the folks that just came in, there are seats here, or you could get seats from our conference rooms as well. So I want to talk about the Bureau of Land Management and the state of public lands, a lot to unpack, but first of all, just talk about where in California these BLM lands are. I think you talked about the Mojave Desert. When I think the BLM lands, I do think the southwestern United States desert, but what your book shows is that BLM lands are all over the state.
Yeah, exactly. So we have 15 million acres in California, but 10 million or 2/3 of these acres are in the Mojave and Colorado deserts of Southern California. I had this, a client of mine from my old job, he gave me this giant wall map of BLM land, the state of California. The national parks are shaded purple, the forests are shaded green. We have a little bit of wildlife refuges here, but not very many.
Yeah.
But the vast majority is this yellow shaded BLM land, and most of it's down in the desert. And so coming from Los Angeles, I thought, this is where I'm gonna start my journey, is down in the desert. But as you mentioned, I mean, we have BLM land in the Eastern Sierra corridor. And if you've driven up the 395, that's all BLM, all through there. Most people are craning their heads west, looking at the Sierra Nevada. I was craning my head to the east because everything east of the 395 is all BLM, all those mountain ranges there. But we also have these really isolated pockets of BLM. If any of you been to the Carrizo Plain National Monument, or the King Range National Conservation Area, those are BLM lands. The King Range, is old growth Douglas fir and redwoods, and the King Mountains, the King Peak rises 4,000 feet from the ocean in under 3 miles. It's kind of this precipitous climb north. So yeah, we have these isolated pockets, but a lot of it, and even in Northeast California, I should say, Modoc, Lawson, kind of the Pitt River flows through a lot of BLM. So it's all over the state, but big 2/3 of it is down in the desert.
Got it, remarkably diverse.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
I imagine everyone in the room and joining the virtual component has had trouble finding a campsite in California. Raise your hand if you. One of the challenges is we have 40 million Californians, a lot of whom love to be outdoors and camp. And I know I'm in the same boat as everybody else, trying to get those campsite reservations 6 months to the minute before.
Yes,
So
exactly.
talk about dispersed camping. Some of us haven't done that before. What does it mean at BLM to actually do that?
Yeah, so I will say there's over 60 BLM campgrounds in the state of California. So we do have campgrounds. None of them take reservations. They're all free to like $12 a night.
Wow.
And even after 5 years of going to these campgrounds over and over and over again, I've never had a problem getting a spot at the last minute. So that's a really nice gateway to BLM land, are these 60+ campgrounds. But we also, and this is kind of incredible to me, even after all those years of learning about it, we have open dispersed camping. You can almost camp anywhere on BLM land across the West. There are some rules, like, I've seen in the Carrizo Plain, I've seen people just driving over brush to get to like a little hilltop. That is not dispersed camping. Dispersed camping is kind of usually along a gravel road, a little pullout, and it looks like someone's already dispersed camped there before. That's kind of but you have to be completely self-sufficient with water, sleeping bag, tent, all of that stuff, or everything locked up in a van, to be able to do that, but you can kind of.
Pack everything out.
Yeah, everything that you can bring in, you gotta pack out, kind of the leave no trace principles are really apparent. There's also, we have 14 BLM field offices across California, and they manage, the BLM land within their district. And they are so helpful with a phone call, like, hey, are there dispersed campsites? Where would I find those? What roads are they off of? And they're usually really helpful. Another really good tool if you want to disperse camp is an app called Onyx, ONX Off-Road. It's really helpful, and you can download offline maps of the places you're going to.
Oh, cool.
Before you leave, because you're not going to have reception out there.
Got it.
But with the offline maps, you can't really get lost, and you can kind of chart out where you're gonna try to disperse camp. Usually there's little turnarounds or gravel pullouts or circular kind of patterns where you can camp.
Got it. Well, I'll say too, for those who, this is planting a seed with around getting out there. Josh ends the book with an appendix with some practical advice.
Yeah, a guide for exploration.
Yeah, which is cool. But a lot of your book, I mean, it's both a sort of a love song to the beauty of the nature of the BLM lands, but you also cover a lot of history. So let's delve into that. Grazing and mining, this is the land of many uses.
Yep.
But you explained that, in recent decades, there's also been a movement to protect the most sensitive areas, be they culturally sensitive areas for tribes or environmentally sensitive areas. And one of the takeaways I got from your book is not all BLM land is created equal in terms of its protections.
Right.
So can you break this down for us?
Yeah, so there's like I said earlier, the BLM was synonymous with the Bureau of Livestock and Mining because it was all cows and mining out there. And in 1976, everything sort of changed with the passage of FLTMA, the Federal Land and Policy Management Act, which was for the first time mandated the BLM through Congress to sort of put conservation and recreation on equal footing with grazing and extraction, because it is a multiple use mandate. It's an important mandate because a lot of our mineral extraction that we use all over the world, it comes from some of those minerals that we have underground. That was sort of the beginning, the tipping point to start sort of try to get an equal footing. The problem that I kind of write about in the book is that the balance is still kind of out of whack. So 15% of BLM land, or 38 million acres, is set aside for conservation and recreation, sort of the cultural areas, wildlife habitats, ecological places that are really important. And 85% of BLM land is really just open for extraction and grazing. That's across the entire agency. I will say in California, that balance is a lot better because of all the national monuments that have been designated. So a place like Chuckwalla National Monument just added 400,000 acres of protected BLM land. The Carrizo Plain, the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, which I write about here, and this guy, Mr. Bob Schneider, was an important figure in that, getting that across the finish line. So yeah, the balance we have here in California is a lot better, but across the West, it's really radical.
Wow, and I've learned that land protection is dynamic. So, you have the national monument, maybe explain to us how those have been created. And then you had very recently the first time that the president ever tried to reduce the size of the national monument. So take us through the arc of that history.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the biggest reason I wrote the book is because as I was learning about these lands from 2015 to 2020, when I started getting out there, during that 5-year stretch was when in 2017, Trump ordered the review of 27 national monuments, including places like the Carrizo Plain and other monuments. And that was really the first time that I began to understand that these lands are under threat. So he obviously left California alone, but he reduced the size of Grand Staircase and Berries Eagers in Utah. So those threats that I was learning about in books from, land transfer and privatization movements, plus, the monument reductions, is really why I started to get like, okay, maybe if no one's telling the story of these lands, how are we going to protect them? Like, how do we protect something that we don't know anything about? And when all our photographers and writers are going to the national parks and taking these epic photos that are seen around the world, there's very few people telling the story of BLM lands. And so that was kind of the impetus for writing the book, was to play a small part in telling that story. But going back to your question, Yeah, so the monument reductions happened in 2017, kind of lit a fire under everybody. They're like, okay, what are we gonna do to solidify these? And then and just recently, if we can jump ahead to 2025, there was bills in the reconciliation bill that were calling for the transfer and sale of BLM lands to private developers. And that is probably the most imminent threat we have right now to BLM lands, is selling them off to the highest bidder.
Which is a little bit, kind of blows your mind to think about, but you're absolutely right. And we've been tracking that, our agency. These are actually congressional proposals. And one of the proposals was to, make hundreds of millions of acres of public land eligible for immediate sale to private development.
Yeah.
And it was remarkable. There were some great environmental groups that quickly put together interactive maps to identify where those areas were vulnerable. And I think it woke everybody up to the threat, whether you're a hunter, or an angler, or a backpacker, or an off-roader.
Yeah.
Kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
What's been kind of your impression of where that all stands? You've spent a lot of time out here with a lot of different people.
Yeah, so in the first reconciliation bill, the natural resources passed this resolution to sell off just lands in Utah and Nevada. And so my first thought was like, get my camera, get in the car, and I went to Nevada and Pershing Square, and I kind of documented these lands because everyone was talking about the totals, the acreage totals, but no one was actually talking about what the landscapes looked like. And so I went out there, and we were filming and taking photos of these 365,000 acres in Pershing County. While I was out there, that resolution was removed because the outpouring of anger from every conservation group, every type of recreationist was so vast. But then as it moved into the Senate, Senator Mike Lee from Utah added another land sale bill that was actually much larger. It was 3.1 million acres, which you described. Then it got shrunk to just selling off 1.3 million acres of BLM land, kind of around cities. And then of course the outcry was still massive, which I was thrilled about because it was only BLM land. And then I think we sent 500,000 comments through the Outdoor Alliance and Conservation Lands Foundation websites.
Yeah.
And backcountry hunters and anglers, and lots like Travel Unlimited, and that kind of put the kibosh, and so that was removed. So it did make it out of the reconciliation package that was just passed in the big beautiful bill, but those threats remain. Like Senator Mike Lee's still out there.
He's saying he's going to come back.
He's going to come back, and with the administration that we currently have, it's in the realm of possibility that we could have these lands sold off to the highest bidder.
Yeah, and I'll share that a lot of the key leaders that have driven this movement to protect more of our public lands through national monuments, including tribes that have led the effort to protect Moloch Bayak in the north, east of Shasta, and the Chuckwalla national monument in the south, are very worried that the Trump administration may
Rescind or
try to rescind those.
Yeah, I'm working on a piece about Chuckwalla right now called The Case for Monuments, not just that we need to keep places like Chuckwalla and Satya up in Northern California by Shasta.
Oh, sure.
Malaguyak's actually
Yeah,
right
sorry.
in your backyard. Yeah, no, I love Malaguyak.
Moloch, for what it's worth, Condor Ridge,
Yeah,
Berryessa Snow, is actually an expansion.
Yeah.
That today the Lintu Nation.
yes, yeah, pretty cool area.
So to correct myself, Satitla, of course, the large, like 200,000 plus national monument east of Shasta.
Yeah, which is managed by National Forest and by the BLM, and then Chuckwalla is, obviously all BLM land.
So do you get a sense those are real threats?
Yeah, I'm constantly checking in with my people in DC, like, is this coming down? So we're trying to time the release of some artwork and this essay I wrote with potential rescinding of those monuments, which would be devastating, not just to like California's 30 by 30, because we added 400,000+ acres to that when Chuckwalla got designated. But yeah, like you said, the tribes were the ones that led both of those efforts, and it would be devastating in terms of local access. In places like Berryessa, Snow Mountain get nominated, then they have a resource management plan that follows those. And oftentimes with RMPs, you get these beautiful maps that suddenly detail new trails that are available and give new campgrounds and access points for local communities. So these monuments are really special because not only do they take a long time to get across the finish line typically, but they provide lots of new recreation opportunities for the local community. So like at the Berryessa Monument, kind of, what's it called, like when they finally designated it, you know, and it's like kind of a big party. There were 900 people at Cowboy Camp. You had people with their horses, you had off-road vehicles. I mean, everybody that local ranchers that were there, kind of this big party to celebrate what was happening. And so these monuments give lots of access to local communities. So rescinding a monument isn't just rescinding protection on BLM land, it's rescinding access for people and new ways to engage with public land.
Yeah, you and I referenced the tribal leadership that drove the designations of those two national monuments very recently. You acknowledge in your book that these government-owned lands ultimately were stolen from Native American tribes and communities.
Yeah.
In our agency and certainly in state government, we're on a journey to reconcile that, to recognize tribal leadership, to find opportunities for ancestral land return and co-stewardship. Just talk about your own learning about this dimension, given you spent so much time in these lands.
Yeah, I think that was probably, I mean, signing a book with Heyday Books is kind of a prerequisite that you're gonna have to acknowledge the indigenous story along the way, and that was really important to me. And you know, it's something that I don't think I even came close to grasping before I started this process. But as I deep dived into all of these histories, it felt like every time I went, the deeper I went, it was just a heartbreaking story of loss. You know, through lopsided deals with the government, through genocide, especially up in Northwest California, through, you know, stolen lands along the way. I mean, every which way that Native peoples that lived here could lose their homes, we made that happen.
Yeah.
And so all of these heartbreaking stories of losses, I tried to incorporate into the stories that I would tell of these lands. I interviewed a friend of mine, a native Homo, Joseph Byron, who's in the wilderness chapter. And, you know, he has this beautiful way of describing his connection to the land. He calls it an invisible umbilical cord. And that the kind of the same connection that mothers have with their children is people have with those landscapes. And for them, there's no boundaries of BLM land and private land. It's this is home. And when that invisible umbilical cord was severed, it severed kind of the story of those peoples, and they're trying to regain that story. Like you said, that's what's happening in your agency. And like what's so cool about these new national monuments is now we have tribal co-stewardship and co-management on these lands. And so we're bringing back this traditional ecological knowledge that tribes have with the landscapes and ecosystems. It's so deeply embedded in their bones in ways that I couldn't possibly understand.
Well, and that to me is, I imagine a lot of people share this experience in the room and joining us, which is some of my most remarkable points of learning are to be on the land with tribal elders, tribal leaders, and to understand the intimacy and the knowledge and the depth of knowledge of these indigenous practices. I've been out there with PhD biologists, you know, trained in Western science, whose jaws literally drop when they have somebody explaining from a tribe the interrelationship between certain plants and animals and how they cultivate those plants and have been doing so for thousands of years. So we talk about it, you know, I stole this from the governor. He talks about, you know, supporting tribal leadership is not only the right thing to do, the smart thing to do.
Right.
Because these folks are
So deeply embedded in
Yeah.
their bodies. MCAT Anderson wrote a great book called Tending the Wild, and she talks about the way they knit themselves to nature. And I just love that metaphor of just so deeply ingrained in who they are in ways that, you know, we can't understand. So yeah, it's not just the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do.
Yeah. In a few minutes, we're gonna have a chance for questions, so get those ready for those who want to ask Josh a question. I want to change gears and ask you about the process of writing a book.
Yeah.
And I also want you to mention your website, but
Yeah.
Heyday Books, for those who don't know, is an extraordinary publisher in California. They publish a friend and colleague, Obi Kaufman's work, in, as Josh points out, a renowned magazine called Native News. And a lot of the best books on Native American culture and history in California by Heyday. How did you hook up with them? How did you get from the, wow, this is a cool project to this hardbound book in front of you?
Yeah, the hardest thing professionally I've ever done. Jim Harrison has this great line, writing is like flying an airplane by yourself for the rest of your life, you know, it's a very solitary journey. Yeah, as I started to go to visit these landscapes in 2020, at that point I knew that kind of the understanding of how they worked, but I hadn't gone out there, and I just started going out all over California and visiting as many of these acres as I could, and I just fell deeply in love with them. And I thought maybe there's a bigger story here than just kind of telling my friends and sharing a few photos on Instagram. And I put together a book proposal and I sent it out to 5 different publishers. Heyday was always my #1 choice, but I wasn't sure they wanted to tell this story. And luckily they were super excited about it, and we signed a deal in 2022, and then during that time I kept going to visit more and more landscapes, taking photographs, and it's a long process, you know. I wrote 60,000 words. You flip that to my editor there, and then she flips it back with I think 3,000 notes.
Wow.
And then I have 1 month to flip it back to her, and then she had 1,000 notes and flipped it back to me, and then I had 1 month to flip it back, and so it's the writing process took about 2 years, and then that last 6 months of editing is just full on, full time, back and forth, back and forth. And then this isn't an easy book to kind of lay out because there's over 100 photographs, there's illustrations, there's story maps, and so it takes a long time just to kind of make the book.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I remember thinking, like, I kept telling myself during the writing process, one day this will be over. One day this book will be in your hands and you'll have done it. And so I just kept plugging away. I had a full-time job, I had 3 kids, and I woke up at 4:30 a.m. every day for 3 years to be able to pull it off. I could get 2 hours of writing done before I woke up the kids for school. Then I had to go to work, and then in the afternoon I could get a couple more hours in, and then after going to bed I could get another hour, and that's kind of how I structured my day for 3 years.
Incredible. So what was the feeling like when Heyday sent you the first physical copy?
I just wanted to cry. Yeah, I just was so grateful to Heyday for putting this together, and honestly this is the fun part, like getting to talk to people and getting to come out and go all over the state talking about this book. But writing is such I think for some it comes a little easier, but for me it just felt like a daily grind.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're lucky that you brought one of your kids, Leo. And Leo, I want to ask you a question. Did you think your dad would ever finish the book?
Some parts no, but then near the end it actually was one.
Amazing. And do you have memories of that? He was explaining, I think you were 2 years old when he went on that first camping trip.
I think that's actually my earliest memory. I remember I would be in my dad's lap at the steering wheel, and he'd be like driving, but he made me think I was driving. My hands on the steering wheel, he was the one moving the steering wheel.
Awesome. And that's not on a public street, that's in the.
That's in the middle of the desert. Yeah. Good feeling, you're saying.
So you're an author, but you're also really active in making the case for public lands, and that's where this Forgotten Lands project, this website comes in. Can you share a little more about that?
Yes, the Forgotten Lands project is kind of just a bigger picture of just this one book. I wanted to tell stories of BLM lands across the Western US. I feel like one of the most incredible things about BLM lands is they're owned collectively and shared by all of us. Like, we don't have the Eiffel Tower or the London Bridge. We don't have the Great Barrier Reef or the Great Wall of China. What makes America so incredibly unique is we have 618 million acres of public land that are shared by all of us and owned by all of us. So, I live in LA, a place that's incredibly expensive. We don't own our own house, but even if you don't, we're all landowners. And that's such an amazing thing about the American West and what we all get to experience. I mean, half of California is public land. And so the Forgotten Lands Project is really just doing as much as I can in terms of storytelling, sharing stories through photographs and written essays about these lands. And so you go on the website, you can kind of get to my newsletter, and through that it goes out to thousands of people every week. And you can read stories about the American West on BLM land. And hopefully, my desire with this book is that it gets really beat up, that you have coffee stains on it, and you have things that are underlined and pages that are dog-eared, and then it gets thrown in your car, and you get to go out there and see some of these places for yourself, because, you know, Baba Diem, a great Senegalese forester in 1968 said, in the end, we will conserve only what we love. And for me, that's what drives my entire project, is the hope that more people will get out to see these places, fall in love with them, and then protect them.
Yeah,
We just don't have enough public BLM land lovers that are standing up for these threats. You know, like when in February, the national park firings came down, 20,000 people protested in the streets across 145 different park units. That happened within 2 weeks. Why? Because so many people have a deep place attachment with national parks. Like imagine if a drilling company wanted to drill on top of Pacto. There'd be riots in the streets around the world because so many people have such an important relationship with Yosemite or Yellowstone, you know, Joshua Tree, Redwoods, Acadia. But we just don't have enough people that have this deep place attachment with these lesser known, you know, these lands aren't forgotten by indigenous tribes, but for many people, they are kind of the leftover lands. They're still seen that way. And so the Forgotten Lands Project aims to highlight these places and how beautiful they are, give points of access, and then hoping people will fight to protect them.
it's incredible. And I love this quote that you started the book with. Aldo Leopold, who's sort of a godfather, godparent of conservation, you know, said in 1948, American conservation is, I fear, still concerned for the most part with showpieces. And so it's a little bit hard to look at the photographs and think these aren't places that millions of or Americans venerate. But it's true.
Yeah, he wrote that in 1948. Right after that, he said, "We have not yet learned to think in terms of small cogs and wheels." And so for him, he was writing about, you know, he just started homesteading on the prairies of Wisconsin. And so for him, it was about these prairies, but I started thinking about BLM lands as sort of the modern day cogs and wheels of the conservation movement. I mean, these are the lands that are hopefully going to get California to across the 30 by 30 finish line. If we still have hundreds of thousands of undesignated BLM lands that would once designated would fall under that 30 by 30 initiative.
Yeah. And I might just say, you know, I certainly live this 30 by 30 but for those who don't, you know, our governor, our legislature have established a commitment that we will conserve, we will protect 30% of our lands in coastal waters by 2030 in the next T-5 years. We have millions of acres more of land to protect, as well as a large portion of our state coastal waters. The good news is over the last few years, we've added about 2 million acres to these conserved areas.
Partly through national monument, isn't it?
Partly through national monuments, yeah, because almost half of our state land, our California, is federally owned and managed. So if we're going to actually protect more land, part of it has to be strengthened in conservation. But I do want to give a shout out to the incredible groups across the state that are working on small projects that are conserving acre by acre. And I so appreciated that you gave a shout out to a bunch of conservation organizations in this book. Whether it's land trusts and others.
They're doing like Mojave Desert Land Trust. Every landscape I went to has a friends group attached to it. So we have Tuolumne up in Berryessa, we have Mattole Restoration Council up in the King Range, we have Mojave Desert Land Trust down there, we have Friends of the Inyo kind of in the Eastern Sierra corridor. And they are really doing the heavy lifting of work on these lands. I talk in the book, like their points, what's so great, another great thing about BLM land is we actually can get out to these places and engage with them. We can do trail building, we can do maintenance, we can do cleanups. You know, sometimes the national parks feel a little bit like nature's behind a velvet rope. On BLM land, you can get out there and make a difference. There are ways to engage, and the ways to engage often come through local conservation groups that are really doing the heavy lifting of conservation.
It's incredible. The unsung heroes.
Yes, absolutely. There's big organizations kind of nationally, but then we have so many in California doing these. They're managing little bits of land or partnering with land agencies that are doing incredible work.
Conservation heroes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I have to say, I'm not sure we've ever had as well timed a conversation as this one, given that it's really just been, the last several weeks that we've seen the attacks on the and the proposed sell-off of the very lands that you're chronicling.
Yeah, I couldn't have anticipated that.
So, you have a lot of state employees here. We're obviously working in state government, but you have folks from outside of state government. What would you have us do? What's your call to arms?
I would say the best way to engage with the BLM lands now is to find those friend groups. Whatever friend group is whatever place in California that is your most passionate place, there is gonna be BLM around there, and find a conservation group that is working on that area and sign up for their newsletters, and they'll start providing all kinds of ways to engage and ways to stand up for these places. You can obviously, Outdoor Alliance, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Conservation Lands Foundation, they only work exclusively with BLM lands, so they're my favorite go-to organization. Sign up for their newsletters, and that's kind of the gateway to start engaging with these places.
Yeah.
And honestly, back to that Papadino thing, like I don't know if I would have cared enough to send a letter to my congressional representative or protest in the streets if I had never been to Berryessa. I'm not sure I would have stood up for that place if I hadn't been there. And so for me, get out there.
Yeah.
Go see these, get this book, go see some of these places, get it from the library, however you can do it, and get out there and start building a relationship with these landscapes. And I'm guessing that people will fall in love just like I have. I lead monthly trips to BLM lands through the USAL project, and I bring 20 to 25 people with me at a time. And I'm always blown away that we get to a landscape and these folks, some of them who have never camped, they get to a BLM land and, they don't know what's coming. They might look around and think like, oh, what's this weekend gonna be like? And not once as I get done to the weekend and the people aren't like, wow, this place is incredible. Even in the I took a group to the Carrizo Plain this spring with the promise of wildflowers.
That's down sort of the I-5 on the way to Los Angeles. You take a right towards the coast.
Yes, kind of in the San Joaquin Valley there. It's the last intact native grassland that we have left in California. We've sort of agricultured our way to this little remnant of grassland that we have left, where that is kind of the home to these really important endangered species. But we also, you've probably seen pictures of it, because when the rains come after a long drought, it turns into a place where people watch the super bloom. That can be seen from space, and it's quite remarkable. I didn't know I was going to get a super bloom when I wrote this book, but it coincided perfectly, and there's some beautiful images. But I took this group there in April thinking like there's going to be some wildflowers out there, and there was almost zero flowers. It rained and sleeted the entire time, insanely windy, and yet after the weekend was over, these 23 people that I took out there had fallen in love a little bit with this landscape and the species that we saw, and the painted rock, which is this incredibly elaborate ancient petroglyph area. And so my hope is that people will get out there. That's what's going to lead to protecting these places.
And I'll just share on a note of encouragement, it was pretty remarkable in the last few months to see the breadth of folks across the country that activated in opposition of the public lands. And encouraging to see that we had leaders in Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, say, not on my watch, including, legislators that we might have significant differences with on a lot of things, but seeing this bipartisan support.
Yeah, public lands are kind of the last bipartisan thing we have left. It's like wildlife crossings, those are kind of share a lot of bipartisan support, but public lands is something that brings the Cabela's and the REI crowd together, the hunters and anglers and the bird watchers all together, and we're kind of stand arm in arm and say like, okay, we are not gonna sell off our public lands, because once they're sold off, we don't get them back.
Big tent conservation, so.
Yes, and in fact, the hunter and angler story is so important to conservation. I actually went with a couple of people that are center right, who are both avid hunters, and actually they took me on a mule deer hunt on BLM land. And that's one of the chapters in the book, because I'm not a hunter, but I wanted to tell the story of hunting and angling in conservation since Teddy Roosevelt. And what better way to do that than actually going on a mule deer hunt?
Get out there.
But it's such a, yeah, it's the Big Ten of conservation.
Excellent. Well, I want to allow our attendees in person here to ask questions, but let me start off with one that's an impossible one, but what's your favorite place? Don't get that too often. You can't give a political answer like they're all great.
Yeah, okay, I'm thinking of where we are in the world here in Sacramento. Okay, so for this crowd, I'll say my favorite place is the Cache Creek Natural Area.
Raise your hand if you've been there.
I've been to the Cache Creek.
Bunch of us,
Okay,
yeah.
so maybe I shouldn't have said that, but if you're at Cache Creek at the end of an April and you park at Cowboy Camp and you cross the Bear Creek right there and you wander in deep into the Cache Creek Natural Area, it is absolutely outstanding. You're probably gonna see some tule elk. You're gonna see all these old blue oaks and valley oaks that are sitting there, and it's incredibly green. There's enough tidy tips for everyone, you know, it's an incredibly diverse place. And if you keep going, you make it into the Cache Creek Wilderness. So you're going from kind of BLM land to wilderness BLM land, and you know, I was there with Bob one April, and I've been there so many times now, camping under the stars there, but it's really special to watch the moonrise from Cowboy Camp. Kind of comes over that range right there, and it's just a full moon there is pretty outstanding. You hear the coyotes howling at night. Some of my most special BLM memories were at Cache Creek.
Wow. Yeah, less than an hour, you know, northeast
Yeah.
again.
Right here,
Yeah,
easy access.
incredible. Questions?
Yeah,
What was that project that you mentioned that you take groups out into different areas, and how can people like look that up or sign up for?
yeah,
And
it's
maybe repeat the question too.
Yeah, so what project do I partner with to take groups out to BLM land? And we go to other places too, but I mostly go to BLM. It's called the USOL Project. They're based in Los Angeles, and their mission is twofold. One is to build community, and two is to get urbanites into the great outdoors. And so it's this really important organization that I've partnered with. So I do usually around one trip a month. We do a lot of BLM if I can get away with it. Sometimes I'll go to the national park, you know, just because I have to Death Valley. But yeah, it's called the USOL Project, and they're actually going to do a pop-up in San Francisco in the next couple of months. I'm going to be leading a trip to the King Range in October.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really cool.
And if folks want to stay connected with your work, remind us of the website and newsletter.
Yeah, if you go to forgottenlandsproject.com, you'll see the newsletter. I have a Substack and other ways that you can engage. I have an Instagram too. I'll get on there as much as I'd like to, but yeah, forgottenlandsproject.com.
And are there Josh Jacksons in other western states with a lot of BLM land, or will there be sort of an Obie Kaufman-esque like 5-volume book project?
Great question. I'm working on the next book, which will be Nevada.
Oh,
So yeah, if you're gonna parachute into the state of Nevada, there's a 67% chance you're landing on BLM land.
wow.
It's full of BLM land, and so that's where the next book will be. So it kind of is a little OBS, but I'm trying to raise up more photographers and writers who are telling the story of these lands. And so what's coming on my Substack newsletter will be writers from other, because I can't get to every place out there. My bank account would slowly dive into the red, but I'm trying to raise up more people who are taking pictures and writing great stories about these landscapes, and then I'll feature them on the Substack. So I send that out every Sunday. And I'm hoping to add Colorado and Montana and Wyoming and other places that have BLM land in the West.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
so exciting
Yeah,
to hear.
trying to build a movement here.
Yeah.
I want next, because you know, when those firings came down, the Park Service, they also in equal amount came down at the BLM.
Yeah.
And I organized a protest in the Mojave Desert, and we had 22 people.
Mm.
I want in 5 years, the next time these threats come, that we have thousands of people on the streets when BLM lands are under threat, not just people that love the national parks.
Yeah, that is.
So we're trying to build a movement.
Yeah, that is something to aspire to. Something that caught my mind when I first grabbed your book was I was looking for who did the photographs, like the photographer. And then remarkably, you're both the author and the photographer, so I just was
I
asked.
guess I should have made that more clear, because I've had a lot of people.
Well, I just
ask
figured
that.
you either did some, give somebody credit or they were your own. No, but like, these are just amazing photographs, and I'll note that on Forgotten Lands project too, some of these prints are for sale.
Yeah,
Are you a professionally trained photographer?
no, I literally bought a $400 15-year-old camera before this project started. I did buy a couple of nice lenses, but yeah, I'm not officially trained as a photographer. I've just kind of learned, I think the most important, I am doing some photography trips now, teaching photography, but I think the most important question you need to ask yourself as a photographer is, what story am I telling? So when you're looking through that lens, what story am I telling in this exact moment? And is it worth the story that's worth telling?
Yeah.
And especially it's important to think about those questions on BLM land, because anybody can go into Yosemite Valley. You point your picture, your camera anywhere, and you're gonna get an epic shot. It's like the scenery does the work for you, but often on BLM lands, like, that's more of a bigger landscape shot. But sometimes on BLM lands, it's not just this like insane kind of John Muir inspired beauty. You have to find the beauty in something that's more subtle.
Well, I want to ask you about that too, because a lot of us who have grown up hiking, tend to be sort of goal-oriented hikers, fast hikers. I actually hike with somewhat with Gavin Newsom's fast hiker, right? Well, something you said in your book is it took you really to slow down to understand the beauty of some of these places.
Yeah, my first trip to the Mojave, I felt, even after a whole weekend, hiking like 25 miles in the weekend in the Rainbow Basin, I still kind of felt underwhelmed by the scenery. I felt like, I write in the book, it was muted colors, interchangeable rock formations, and I thought, is there a story out here? And I had read this great book by Terry Tempest Williams called Refuge, and in Refuge, she has this great line: if the desert is holy, it is because it is a forgotten place that allows us to remember the sacred. Perhaps that is why every pilgrimage to the desert is a pilgrimage to the self. There's no place to hide, and so we are found. And that was that resonated so deeply with me, and I actually wrote it on a 3x5 card, and I carried it with me on all of my desert trips. And I remember sitting out in Rainbow Basin on that first trip, looking at this 3x5 card, looking out at the desert and saying, is this place really holy? And if a pilgrimage to the desert is a pilgrimage to the self, what am I going to find out here? How is this desert going to challenge my preconceived ideas? And for me, I started treating subsequent trips as kind of a pilgrim. And you think about a pilgrim as somebody that's walking really slowly, somebody that's noticing. I'd always hiked to find the best, most epic scenery, the mountaintop, the wild, rushing whitewater rivers. But BLM land is a lot of desert and a lot of sagebrush. And in slowing down, I started to gain a new perspective. And I'd always prided myself as a hiker in mileage gain and elevation gain. And a pilgrim is kind of the opposite. And I remember on my second trip, I spent like a whole weekend. I think I walked 2.5 miles.
Wow.
Because I had slowed down so much and trying to document every single thing I was seeing and along the way. And I write in the book that the desert often sings quietly, offering sweet melodies for anyone who will listen. So for me, the pilgrimage to the self was thinking of myself as a walker, as a pilgrim, not as a hiker. And slowly the holiness of the desert, as Terry Tempest Williams wrote, became more clear.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, it's been remarkable, almost an hour. I want to give anybody with a burning question the chance to raise a couple questions here. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for writing the book. I worked for the BLM for 10 years, and it's just really amazing to see these places, on display and activities.
Thank you.
The question was, you mentioned like the BLM's experiencing the same kinds of Park Service. Have you seen any repercussions of that yet? Or can you talk a little bit about just that being another threat to these lands? It's just literally losing the people it takes to manage them.
Yeah, I mean,
And maybe repeat the question.
oh yeah, sorry.
That's a fine question.
Yeah, the cuts coming down at the BLM and staffing cuts. Have I seen any effects yet on the ground? That's the question. I would say I haven't yet. But I'm anxious to get out there in the next couple of months to see if, because often what happens with staffing cuts is you lose, campground access, roads are cut off. Right now in the Mojave, we have one BLM ranger often managing 1 million acres of land. So this is an agency, as you would know, that's already historically understaffed and underfunded. And we have this ragtag group of people who are often doing 3 jobs at one time at the BLM. I've noticed in the past, the main effects of these staffing and funding cuts usually happen around campgrounds. So campgrounds will be closed, or pit toilets will be closed, or you go to the bathroom and there's no toilet paper. Road closures happen. So I haven't noticed any like tangible things yet, but I can imagine that it's coming. And this is the whole goal of this administration, is like defund, dismantle. To the point where people are having such a bad experience out on public lands that they think, well, I guess the private industry would do a better job.
Yeah.
Like a system deliberately starved of resources is inevitably going to struggle.
Yeah, and it's
I think
remarkable.
that's the point.
Yeah, and I think, there are so many well-intentioned people across California and the West that are trying to keep these public lands visitable. The town of Mammoth, for example, has literally signed an agreement with the Park Service where city workers are cleaning Forest Service toilets because they need to be serviced, but there are not enough Forest Service. I was up with a conservation group, Sierra Butte's Trail Stewardship, and they quite quickly tried to establish, I think they did establish a partnership with the key national forests around there so that their nonprofit employees and volunteers could go clean federal campground toilets. So, I mean, the tragedy is, there's this seeming dismantling of the agencies, but then so many folks that are trying to fill in, and it's really not their role, and they're never gonna be able to afford to do it.
Yeah, volunteers can't do the bathroom cleaning,
Right.
And I mean, they can to an extent.
Right. It's not
It's like
sustainable.
the Department of Defense in 15 hours of the Department of Defense budget could fund the BLM for an entire year.
Wow.
So like when you think about those numbers, you think like. If our president wants to make America great again, why don't we just make America's public lands great again? Like
That's it, yeah,
fund these 4 critical agencies.
there you go, I'll buy that hat. Question?
Thank you for coming here to speak. We've been very fortunate here in California that we've had visionary state and federal leaders that have protected the lands that we've covered. And I'm really heartened to hear that you're thinking about Nevada and other states. I don't know if you're familiar with this issue. If you are, if you could speak to it. Right now, there is a land transfer happening of federal land in Arizona at a place called Oak Flat that is sacred to the San Carlos Apache Nation. If you're not familiar with it, no worries, but it seems to be a prime example of, when you talk about the forgotten lands that are under threat.
Yeah, I know what's happening at Oak Flat, but I'm not sure, I don't feel like I have enough kind of deep pools of knowledge to comment too further on it. I don't know, is that a land, I don't know if that's a land transfer sale or if it's just giving the mining company access to that, and then it'll kind of almost be like a land transfer
It
sale.
is a land transfer, it is a land swap.
Got it, okay.
They say that, but it's a
mental giveaway.
The largest open pit coal, copper mine in the world.
Yeah,
So just for those that are joining virtually on the YouTube streaming, great question about a situation in Arizona where it sounds like a mining interest is trying to gain access on lands that are sacred to a Native American tribe there.
yeah,
And to me, the point there is, again, it's not mission accomplished in terms of conserving, protecting our lands. This struggle continues. And if it's not a big, congressional bill, it may be, the attempted sale by 1,000 cuts or death by 1,000 cuts.
yeah, exactly. And that's a good prime example of
Yeah.
death by 1,000 cuts. There's still a lot of horrible things in this bill, even though the land sale package was removed.
Yeah,
Gutting NEPA, all those different little things.
yeah. So I mean, the struggle continues, and that's why we're so thankful and excited that you're building this movement. You're helping build a movement that already exists and gaining momentum.
Yeah,
We're almost at the top of the hour, and we're doing something fun that we've never done before, and that is give out a couple prizes to those who are here. And the genesis of one of these prizes is a copy of Josh's book. I had actually already had a copy, and my wife bought me a membership in Heyday, which is a great. You can do an annual membership in Heyday and get native news, and we wanted to support the publisher, so I got a second copy. So Kim and my colleague and I were thinking, well, Olivia, what can we do with this? And we said, we're gonna make it into a door prize. We also have this collector's item, this Chuckwalla National Monument drinking vessel, which is great, and never been more important just to show support for Chuckwalla as it's under threat. And then last but not least, we have this Earth Day sun hat from which was the governors of Pacheco State. So Olivia or Kim, you're gonna help us figure out how to.
Do you wanna do the honors of Captain?
Well, come on up. Show folks on the video here. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, wow, so all of those who registered, you have a little wedge of the wheel. And what do I?
Just tap the wheel.
Oh. All right,
There you go.
officially spinning. And it is Gene Masuda. Oh, there it is.
You can tap again, you can do another one for the next
All right.
prize. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Oh.
All right. One of the things we're working to do, here is bring more in-person events. So other
Yes.
conversations I've done virtually,
Yeah,
so fun to have you.
yeah, thank you for having me too.
Yeah. Bob Snyder. You already had one. All right.
Give it to me, Bob.
Yeah, you could have made a new friend. You could have given it out.
I'll make a new friend and.
Nikita Isaac. Our colleague Nikita. And then last but not least, want to get one more tap? Okay. We have Loon Yi. Is Loon here? Oh, Jacqueline Ramirez.
Wait,
Well, Josh, I'm really excited that you also have books with you.
I got a few books left.
Yeah, and so, and I imagine you'll sign those for folks.
Yeah, if anybody wants to grab a book or have me sign a book, I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, well, just huge thanks.
Oh, thank
to
you for having me.
To Leo and the family for putting up with your dad for over 3 years, writing this book. And for all you do, and here's to getting out there
Yeah.
more often altogether.
Yeah.
Can you join me in thanking? Yeah,
We'll be here.
yep,
Yeah.
forward to the next one.
Yeah.